A lot of Thursdays since the pandemic began, we have brought in the resources of one Chris Burkhardt from Placer Staffing because we like to talk about your next job and some of the factors that surround these kinds of things. Hey, Chris, good morning.
Good morning, Pete. Happy Thursday to you.
Yes, back at you, sir. You know, here's one thing I wanted to get to ask you today. The federal vaccine mandates, Chris, have been in the news a lot lately. And can you help us kind of provide some insight on what these mean for candidates and employees as well as employers?
Well, to say that this is a big deal is an understatement.
Yeah.
It's personal. It's politics. Many firms are concerned about the burden of figuring out how to comply with such short notice. Are we going to lose staff? And we're already feeling short staff for folks that, hey, it's a personal choice. If you don't want to get the vaccine, you can leave. So it's been issued, and it's being contested by lots of states. But it basically indicates that if you're an employer of over 100 people, that you'll have to ask your staff to get vaccinated for COVID or be subject to weekly testing. And there's a couple of big dates out there. Organizations have to be ready by 12/4, just not that long after Thanksgiving, right, to have all their information organized for their current employees. And then the mandate goes into effect January 4th. If you're a candidate, which we get this question all the time, Pete, you can't be asked about your vaccine status. That's like the number one question. But you can be asked after you've received your offer of employment. That could be verbal or, a piece of paper or electronic. And then two final points. This mandatory testing for unvaccinated workers, the guidance is suggesting that the burden of cost is on the employee, which is an interesting shift. And obviously, the federal government is encouraging the unvaccinated to consider this. The employer burden is if someone does choose to get the shot, then PTO for getting the shot is mandatory. And if you don't feel well after it, you also you have to have PTO.
Yeah, great pieces of advice, Chris. One thing I've noticed is we've seen a lot less volatility in the unemployment numbers of late. Now, could we see more shifts in the number, or do you think that it's likely going to be a signal that the job market's impact from COVID, for maybe lack of a better term, is settled?
Pete, we probably talked about unemployment, would you say 30 or 40 times in the last 2 years?
Yes, sir.
I would say this is probably our last time. It dropped last week 1,000 workers. It's down to 268,000 folks. Pre-pandemic was only 50,000 less. It is my humble opinion that as we move through the next month or two, we're going to get back to that pre-pandemic level. And what I would introduce to you and to the listeners, our bigger issue is that there are 5 million Americans sitting on the sidelines, about 1.5 million aged 25 to 54, and 3.5 million 55 and over. And that's where we've got to just figure out what the heck's going on.
Yeah, sure thing. And yet you also have the number of resignations and quits at record levels now. You have candidates with this leverage at the moment in the job market because of this factor. How long can that be sustained? And what can employers do to work on retention programs in their companies?
Well, we all love to label things, right? So
Yes.
It's been called the Great Resignation, but now I'm going to call it the job hopper economy. So, quit rate measures workers who leave their jobs voluntarily. And it was 3% in September. That's a record high. And, I'm not always great with numbers, but 4.4 million Americans out of the 160 million that are working changed jobs. It's like 1 in 6.
Yeah.
And then more than half the people that moved into jobs were filling roles that were vacated. So here's what I see. Very high percentage of employees are leaving for more pay and benefits. But this is a game of musical chairs. And I don't often use this framing, but employees are poaching working staff. There are not as many that are unemployed being redeployed. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're an employer, you have to pay a competitive salary or you can expect to lose this war for talent. You should consider flexibility in schedules. The biggest of all that I see now is this concept of upskilling. Offer the less skilled a chance to get more skilled. That's where it's at right now. Workers want to do work with a purpose that they identify. So show and tell why your firm exists. What are its programs in diversity or inclusion, or perhaps even how the impact on the environment or social issues? And I'll end with a bit of a joke, but also something serious. Call me at Placers. Seriously, don't go it alone and leverage. You got to leverage third parties. So that joke aside, you got to consider third parties. I represent a good industry. I don't know firms that can figure this out on their own.
Great points. Well, you brought it today. I love that. This was really news you can use, and it always is, but such timely and so much stuff going on, Chris, and I just think it's of great value to have you on, and I'm glad we got a chance to talk this morning. I will talk to you soon.
Thanks for letting me create value, Pete.
Absolutely. Chris Burkhardt, Placers Staffing, joining us here on Del Aware.